It's Thirsty Thursday, everybody. Welcome to the Dadbodd podcast, episode number 88, and it is the Shark and the Gun Takeover. I am your host, Zach Guns Picks. Joining me today from the preview of the S&G show, also known as Shark and the Gun, college football preview every Friday, starting August 26th, I believe. It is the man, the legend, Sharky Waters Nation. What's going on, my friend?
Taking a breath, 7:52 p.m. Eastern, and as you mentioned, we are 1 month out from the premiere of the Shark and the Gun, college football knowledge for college. Not understated, not underrated. We are ready to go. Guns Picks, a blessing to be here. Lead the way, and let's get going.
All right, we're gonna start this out right. I want to get the capper breakdown, so I'm gonna give you two picks for the MLB, one for tomorrow and one for tonight. And tonight, I'm not going to explain it any more than this. It's going to be the Chicago Cubs are playing tonight. Steele is going to be pitching, and I'm taking the over for F5 on that one. And I think that's going to hit right there. So, but the next play, this is going to be a lean for now because I haven't seen the line come out. But I'm looking at the Miami and New York Mets game tomorrow for the under for the F5. Listen, Alcantara is going to be pitching for the Miami Marlins. At home, 7 out of his 10 starts at home went under in F5. He has been absolutely dominant, even though he can't get the wins from his team. Now, Bassett's going to be pitching for the New York Mets. He's led once in his last 5 starts, but in his last 6 starts overall, home and away, he's only given up 5 runs total, and that includes 4 shutouts. So I think there's going to be a pitcher's duel more than a slugfest for both these teams. And granted, Miami's offense is terrible, so give me the under in this one. It's probably going to be 3.5. If it gets to 4, God bless it, hammer it. So I like that play.
Honestly, let me just jump off that real quick.
Go ahead.
Sandy, and I had a guy correct me on the pronunciation here. So you said Alcantara.
Alcantara.
Alcantara. It's apparently Alcantara. So Sandy Alcantara. We love to say it because the guy is probably the best pitcher in the league, if I'm being honest. The guy is an absolute stud. And Guns, you are so on it, so correct. This under is speaking to a sustainability of this guy's quality.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been one of those ones that has been like, you don't even have to look once you see him pitching. You just got to hit that under because, it's going to be very difficult for him to hit. And unfortunately, he plays for the Miami Marlins and not a contender. So it's kind of crazy seeing him kind of struggle. And hopefully, maybe by the trade deadline, Miami might want to give him away. But who knows? We'll see. But I want to talk about baseball just for that long. We're done because I'm having the July burnout, and maybe we should talk about this for a little bit. We bet baseball, and we have this a little bit of excitement, at least from my perspective. So April to June, I'm loving betting baseball. I'm having a good time. It's a daily thing. I can get to look at the board, pick a few plays, boom, I'm sailing. By July, once you start seeing guys going back to camp in the NFL, you start seeing all the media days for college football. You start to get that, you know what? I just don't feel like betting baseball anymore. Do you have that same type of burnout when it comes to the MLB?
I do. We were talking about this off the record. I want to get people in here. I know people are watching from my channel, of course, Guns Picks and the Shark. We're in here. We are now Thirsty Thursday. Cheers up, Fears Down, having a nice seltzer here. So for those of you guys who are enjoying your life, please enjoy it. We love to do it for you guys and with you guys at all points in time. Delicious. I mean, just a delicacy. I mean, delicious.
And we'll say that's a Viva Seltzer for our sponsor, Viva Seltzers. Shout out Viva Seltzers. Go check them out on Twitter. There we go. Here's the ad read.
We're just putting out the competitor just to bring a little competition into this lifestyle. But no, I mean, truthfully, people that have been watching me for a period of time know that my win rate in MLB has definitely been amazing. And that's definitely not a brag point. That's just sustainability. But recently it's been difficult, and there's just no way around it. The lines and range are sharp. The environment is very sharp. When you start to see bad teams laying 175, I made the comment earlier, when you see the Cubs laying 175, it doesn't matter if it's in the division with your theoretical ace versus Pittsburgh. when you see the Cubs as currently constructed laying 175, you know the market has completely shifted to a lack of access, where books are basically telling you, we know exactly what's going to happen. We're just going to make you pay 2-1 for it. And that's not where you make your money in baseball, because if the off chance that goes awry, you lose theoretically 2-1 versus your bankroll. It's hard to recover from that. And, it's a burnout, but it's also the books just absolutely honing in on the environment. And fortunately, we are in an environment here in late July where I believe college football is less than 1 month away.
I know it is. You start to get that excitement. And I think that's part of the baseball burnout too, is like, I just want to sit. I want to look at every single team. I want to know who's where. Are we bringing back a lot of the guys on each one of the teams? Who are they playing week 1 through 4? I want to know the schedule. I want to know the lines. I want to be able to be so prepared for the Shark and the Gun show that there is nobody that knows the game from a gambling perspective than us. That's what I strive to do. That's what you strive to do. And we want to give you the best product possible.
Yeah. And, one of the things that we want to do is we want to give you early looks. Mm-hmm. So we're going to look at the early card here. August 27th, we got 11 games. This is definitely an unknown. And we were just discussing this. We got a couple conference games, which unfortunately lean us towards the Big Ten, which is one of the sharpest conferences by a mile. However, Guns, I think you were talking about one game. Let's lead off with that. Let's just go through it and see what the hell is going to happen here.
Yeah, let's talk about, and I'm not talking about week 0. Week 0, you look at the games on this one, it's really lackluster. There's nothing that really sticks out in my perspective. We kind of talked a little bit about before the show. We talked about North Texas and UTEP and how there might be an opportunity there, but we have to research a little bit more. Yeah. Week 1 is actually the game I'm circling right now, and that's Mississippi State's going to be playing Memphis, and they're going to actually be playing at home this time. Now, if you remember, if you actually watched that game, I know I did. I had a big play on Memphis as a dog at home, but it was a short dog. They were actually +2.5, +3 in some books, and I think it dipped down to +2, +1.5. So the outcome of that game is Memphis won outright. They are an absolute juggernaut at home. They play their best at home. They're one of the worst teams away, though. They just can't get motivated enough. Now you have a Mississippi State team that's bringing back most of their starters from last year. Rogers is going to be the quarterback. They're bringing back some of the receivers. The line's going to be healthy. And they actually, their defense improved at the end of the season. They're bringing back most of their defensive players as well. So Memphis can't defend the pass for shit, and Mississippi State loves to pass the ball. The line is -17. Granted, I said the line last year was 2.5, 2 at some books, maybe 1.5. So that is a big jump from when you look at these two teams bringing back most of their key players on both squads. It's predicated on a situation that, one, Mississippi State is going to be motivated very highly in a revenge spot. They're playing at home in the opener against a team that plays poor on the road. That screams to me, no matter what the line is this one, Mississippi State is going to blow the doors off of the Memphis Tigers. So we like this game. And right now you can get at -17. I think this line could jump up big time if you're really smart with it.
And that's a key point, true, in terms of the actual lines within college football. Of course, I talked about it numerous times. The line is a probability figure, expectancy, not a price. But CLV is very real in college football, where you want to get that 17. If this gets up to 17.5, and all of a sudden they win by 17, you're in a tough spot, and it could get juiced 18, 19, 19.5. Some of the line moves in college basketball and college football, both, particularly in these smaller conference games. Of course, obviously it's the SEC, so it's not a conference game. Excuse me, not a small conference game, but they just will get steamed out of the ass. And you will see certain handicappers, truthfully, just cap the steam, where they're capping a 4.5-point move. And it's just ridiculous from open to close from about 2 weeks prior to the actual environment. But, truthfully, this game, we're not going official right now. No. But this game is absolutely going to be on the card. And it's just a great look. It's what you want to see in terms of the line. As you mentioned, we got a 19-point gap in the line. Football is not exactly basketball, but it's the same general weighting. It should be about 3 to 4.5 points. When you get 19, you get huge, and you get, as Gunn said, You get Memphis on the road, which is where they just purely do not function very well at the SEC, a different style of football, a more physical style of football. And it's going to be an absolute blowout potentially, I think.
Yeah, and I really liked how Mississippi State finished the year off very strong. Granted, their bowl game was basically predicated on 10 guys deciding not to play or they couldn't play an hour before kickoff. And a lot of people I know had Mississippi State, including myself. And I was like, wish I knew that information. But those are the dangers that you deal with when you're betting bowl games. So, yeah, that will definitely be on the card for sure.
Yeah, and honestly, we were talking about this just briefly, but I think it's worth talking about. We're going back to August 27th, of course, the first slate of the entire campaign. But, when you start to look at the card, you really try to figure out if there's access points or not. Of course, the first game of the season is definitely a little bit unknown just by default. So we go back to last year, we look at lines, we look at dynamics, we look at in and out of conference and whatever's going on here. And you start to look at games like North Texas at UTEP. And we were just discussing this last year. North Texas was a road juggernaut, and they were horrendous at home. So, Guns, you go back to this game, you look at a lot of different dynamics, and you look at the total being inflated. Mm-hmm. What do you think about this game?
Yeah, we were just looking at this before, and we were just looking at the outcomes of 2021 on both sides of the ball. And you look at North Texas, and a lot of their scores ended up being in the high 50 range, high 60 range in a lot of cases, 45-28, and so on and so forth. Very high scoring in a lot of cases, whether it be from the North Texas side or they're just playing a juggernaut team and their defense was terrible. This game was interesting because the outcome of this game was North Texas won the game at home 20-17 in a string of games at the tail end of the season where they had to win at least 5 games to get into a bowl game. And they ended up accomplishing that and getting to that 6 wins in an immaculate run at the end of the season. Now that you see the total in this one, it's 55.5. Like I said, the total of the game outcome last year was 37. So that should tell you something there, that the control of this game is probably going to be more offensively rather than defensively and clock management. So that kind of plays a little bit higher into the North Texas side of things. The line on this one really last year was +1 for North Texas, and now they're -1 on the road. So the line is pretty sharp in this section, but I think the total is probably a lean at the very least on taking the over in game 1 of week. I guess it'd be not week 1, week 0, but that is just a lean.
I agree. I think that this is a great initial look. And I think one of the things that people talk about oftentimes is later season. You look back at week 0, week 1, and you say, wow, how much did books miss that total by? Mm-hmm. And I think you could actually look back going to Christmas Day, and you look back on a college football season as we're getting ready for the playoff, and you say to yourself, that 55.5, that probably should have been 64.5. Mm-hmm. And you are really going to get exploitability here. And they're already telling you a northward story, of course, as Guns mentioned. 20-17 last year, crazy under defensive battle, which was not symptomatic of how these teams play each other historically or last year for North Texas or UTEP situationally. But you come back off of 20-30 or 20-17, you get a 55.5, and you get the line flipping in the direction that we want it. It's just a great over. There's no way around it. We'll probably be official there as well.
Yeah.
And keeping it going, Guns. Let's talk about UConn here. We got UConn at +27.5 against Utah State. Is that in conference now, or am I just reading incorrectly? I could be reading incorrectly, but regardless, we are at Utah State -28, 60.5. Any comments here?
It's always tough to take UConn. Now, if my memory goes back correctly, I think UConn had to play San Jose State in week 0 last year on the road at San Jose State. San Jose State absolutely leveled. I mean, It was embarrassing. I don't think I could ever in my entire life spend a nickel betting on the UConn Huskies in football. Basketball, maybe, but football, not so much. It's 28 for a Utah State team. That to me, screams out, I don't really like the game, but I may like the first half. And I may want to take Utah State. And if that doesn't hit in the first half on some fluke touchdown that UConn scores to motivate themselves going into the second half, I guarantee they're going to get Utah State's going to get screamed at for giving up one touchdown to UConn. So I would probably just go and back that up in the second half. But I would never put a nickel. I'm not saying I'm betting on this game. I'm not saying this is the game that I'm going to take. But if I'm going to take a side, I would probably take Utah State.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't disagree. I think the over here also has access. I think when you look at the 60.5, again, a UConn team that is very, very lackluster, backwoods, if you want to use that word. But that's what we're trying to figure out in terms of college football. Who are the backwoods teams that have complete inconsistencies, which is what you want to figure out. And when you start to figure out totals, of course, it's not necessarily the fact that we don't think Utah State here is going to blow them out, because they probably should. Of course, they are favored by 4 touchdowns. But the total, I think, is more exploitable, similar to what we were saying in terms of the North Texas UTEP game. So I think 4 touchdowns might be open season for a little backdoor late. As you mentioned, the first half could be better. But again, we don't know how these teams function first half versus second half, home road, the opener. It's a very open season for ambiguity. But the total, I think, again, is a northward point. I think UConn is not a great offense, but when they're laying the line out at 60.5, you're looking at potentially an environment where a bad defense gets hammered and the other team lets down and gives up some points to UConn. So I think the over there is definitely a solid look. And segueing off of that, if we will here, do you have any comments on the Northwestern Nebraska game? Nebraska game, 12:30.
Not the only thing I want to look at. I want to see what Pat Fitzgerald has done to his team as lately. Now we know what's going on with Scott Frost and Nebraska, and everybody's always high in Nebraska every year, all in. And now they're playing on the road week 1, and I just can't trust anything that Nebraska brings. I can't really trust anything that Northwestern brings. Listen, Brandon Joseph was their best defender for Northwestern. He's at Notre Dame right now. He's going to be being part of that electric defense is going to be coming out for Notre Dame. So watch out for them. I have to look at this a little bit further. You got Northwestern playing at home, very tough place to play, but this team had a humongous continental shift in the production from 2020 versus 2021, where they were just an absolute team that could not do anything right. But Pat Fitzgerald, like I said, great coach. He's been there for a while. He's a seasoned veteran, so I'd like to see what he does with this team. This might be a look and see, but the total on this one is 50.5. Seems very high for a Big Ten matchup, especially in week 1 when everyone's trying to figure themselves out a little bit. That could be a take to maybe take the under, but I would probably have to spot check that a little bit more. 12.5 is a lot for Nebraska. Seeing them as a road favorite that high, I have to look at Northwestern and see who is coming back from that team, what happened last year. I need to get more into the Big Ten before I make a decision on that game.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Obviously, as you mentioned, Pat Fitzgerald, incredibly, incredibly underrated. Maybe not so underrated anymore, but originally very underrated coach of the Big Ten. Obviously signed, I believe, a long-term contract with that team. Of course, there were a lot of big suitors trying to get him to come off of Northwestern. He did not. A lot of respect there. But again, respect or not, the product was horrendous last year. So you look at the other side of this with Nebraska. Nebraska also was pedestrian to horrendous last year. So 12.5 is a strong line. The only question you ask yourself within the Big Ten particularly is this line just not informationally correct from a Vegas standpoint? Right. I do think, and it's mild disagreement, Guns, I do think the over here could have access. I think when you see Northwestern, I believe somewhere around Chicago, Evansville or something like that.
Yeah, it's around Chicago.
Yeah. I think you think about this, August 27th, it's warm, it's Chicago summer, you got a conference game, the opener. This is probably not going to be your classic Big Ten November 20th game. That's going to be, freezing cold on the water, lakefront snow, and the whole thing. Mm-hmm. This game could open up, in my opinion. I think 50.5 is a pretty well averaged line. And I think just historically in general, the Big Ten and the SEC, they don't really give you a lot of access on the lines. The lines are very just sharp and stock. They're not really telling you a great story. So you have to do a little more detailed research in terms of what is actually going on in the game versus looking at the line as a dictating point to your cap. But I do think, just as a real loose narrative point, again, 12:30 p.m. here, August 27th, on the lake, not on the lake, but that's the Chicago corridor. It's Michigan. It's warm. 50.5. I could see a higher scoring game here, actually.
Another variable that I want to talk about here is Nebraska, had Martinez playing there, and I think he was there for probably 8 years, at least from how I feel he was there that long. He's playing at Kansas State now, so they got a new quarterback situation in there, and that could be predicated on the high line here and also the high total. So I'd have to look at who's going to be the quarterback for Nebraska this year, and who knows? They may be turning things around for that program, and you know what, Scott Frost, he's going to have to, because if not, he's going to be out of the job by the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And as you mentioned, interesting dynamic there though with Fitzgerald and Frost both coming off of lackluster campaigns. Mm-hmm. The spread is going to be difficult. Again, we don't know, but I think the total has some access. And anyway, let's continue on this, and we'll ride in there.
I just wanted to bring this up because our buddy Sam is hitting us up, and he's saying ND baby, and I want to talk a little ND.
Oh yeah,
that's my team. That's my guy, and I want to talk about. You know what? Freeman is on the media tour, like he's selling a TV show or selling an album that's going to be coming out soon. It brings us to the transition in college football of what's going on as far as the dynamic are. We had this discussion right before we started with the podcast here about what makes a great coach in college football. And you're seeing a guy like Freeman. He's 36 years old. He's very young. He's very charismatic. He's what they call a player's coach. Now we've seen that work successfully in the NFL to a certain point, but we haven't seen that happen a lot on the college football end. And when you see Freeman, he's a great recruiter, and you can see that into the future of the programs that he's bringing in. But the question that I have, and I think we were in agreement with this one, Shark, is does that translate into wins, production, and domination as a program to get to the college football playoff and get to win a national championship? That is to be seen from Mr. Freeman, who has zero experience as a head coach. He's been mostly a defensive coordinator where you can be a player's coach in that situation. So I wonder, from a 4-quarter perspective, you may be able to be successful in 3 quarters, but can you get to the 4th quarter where you need to be respected and feared slightly? So you will go and do whatever it takes to break through that wall above your potential to go get those victories. What are your thoughts on the player coach in college football?
I think there's a lot to unpack there, and I think it's mostly psychology. But if you watch some of the clips after Brian Kelly was fired and you watch the group rally around this guy in the weight room, it reminded me more so, again, of a player in their group really being with the players, which is, of course, a great thing. But does it translate to on-field success in the next season? Where, again, it's great because they probably didn't like Brian Kelly. I mean, a lot of people troll Brian Kelly. They give him a lot of shit. I'm not going to make a comment. I'm not informed on the guy enough. I know he is a hard-on, though. 100%. He's an ass. And he holds them accountable. So you ask yourself, is their infatuation and their happiness with Marcus Freeman so much about Marcus Freeman, or just the fact that Brian Kelly is gone? And now, is there an underreaction in performance? Because, again, Brian Kelly is such a hard-on. Now it's one of those things where teams overreact to the fact that this coach is no longer tyrannizing them, theoretically, but it's too casual. Mm-hmm. And you look at week 1 going into Ohio State, I mean, we were talking about this. this could be a potential blowout, I think.
Yeah, and as a fan, I'm preparing my mind and my mentality and my heart to deal with that, and I'm probably going to spend the second half sulking in my garage, crying in my in my beer. It's a 16.5, 17-point line. It's probably going to jump up higher. That's my thought process on it. It's hard for a head coach, especially Marcus Freeman. His first 2 games are against an Oklahoma State team in a bowl game, a major bowl game. And then you have to go to the shoe, your former alma mater, by the way, because he was a linebacker for the Buckeyes, and go play, bring your team in and go play against one of the touted favorites, not even to make the championship against Alabama in they have CJ Stroud back. We saw the performance of was considered the 3rd best receiver on the team. But if you ask the teammates, he goes, no, he's the number 1 receiver. And you saw that in the Rose Bowl. And they're bringing back Trayvon Henderson. So a lot of the guys are coming back. Ohio State's going to be high on their horse after having a what is considered a disappointing season for Ohio State, especially losing to Michigan. That could have got them in the college football playoffs. So it's going to be a tough game going out for Freeman. I don't think it's going to be a testament of what's to come for Freeman, but he's going to have to understand being a player coach is fine for recruiting. But once you get on the field and you need to be a disciplinary, you need to be more than just the older brother. You need to be the father figure. And I hope to see that from Marcus Freeman as he progresses as a head coach.
Yeah, and honestly, just continue on that for just a half second. I think that it's not going to go the correct direction here. I think this is an overreaction hire. I think that they're going the complete polar opposite. Of course, Brian Kelly, I don't know how old he is, 60, 58, 60, something like that. Again, angry, authoritarian, this, and that. All of a sudden, you bring in a guy, an ex-player, Ohio State backer, 36 years old. We're talking about a bro. And, you talk about psychology of coaching. The coach doesn't need to be essentially a drill sergeant in the military, but they also can't be your best friend and your bro. And I think they overreacted here a little bit. You had the drill sergeant. He's gone. Now we went from 100 to 0. We needed to be in the middle. And this is not a middle ground hire, in my opinion. I think this is one of those hires, and you've seen this with Notre Dame over the years. You've seen this with a lot of big conference schools. Of course, Notre Dame not in a big conference, but just in general, in terms of funding and whatnot, they will make overreaction hires, and then it settles. The team underperforms drastically, and then they reset, maybe say 2 or 3 years from now with the correct coach. And again, I just think this is probably going to go awry if I had to really make an official remark.
I mean, I'm just going to wait and see. I didn't hate the hire initially because I knew what I knew it would lead to players not leaving the program. And I didn't want transfers. I wanted to keep most of the core whole. And that's what they did and that tells a lot that the players respect him.
Right.
And I don't know if that's because he's a fun guy or if that's because that seeing him as if I was a player and I wanted to go to the NFL, I want a guy that could make me better. And I think he's a guy that can make you better. I just don't know what his process is and if it's right and if that's going to work onto the field. But that's time will tell. I think another situation for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish is Tyler Buchner is probably going to be the starter for them. He's got snaps under him. I just don't know if he's going to be the guy. I think they have the guy in waiting like 2 or 3 years down the road. They also got Pine in the backup. So they have the quarterbacks that can actually play, who's gotten snaps and been productive. But when you have 2 quarterbacks and you have a quarterback situation, you really have none. You should know who your starter is from day one, from camp start. This is your guy. You should announce that to the media. It's like, you know what? Tyler Buchner is going to be our starter. Period. Let the team know and that guy and see what Tyler Buchner does, because you need a leader on the field offensively. Defense will be fine because Freeman is a defensive guy. I want to see what the offense can do.
Yeah.
But that's me as a fan. All right, that's Notre Dame talk. I'm sorry. I didn't want to make this a Notre Dame podcast, but that's what I was trying to do. Uh,
I mean, please do. I mean, it's a stalwart franchise, and there's just no way around it. So it's worth discussing. Going down the board, though, I just clicked into more Week 1 stuff here. I think there's a handful of games worth discussing. One of the games that I think is just incredibly noteworthy, and I want people to have a snapshot to how we cap, and this is what I was talking about earlier, but you always look at the line. You don't look at the line as a price. You look at the line as a probability figure. In terms of the spread, you look at it as an average expectancy. And when you see something that just stands out and is like really just bizarre, awkward, it doesn't make sense, those are the games you should be looking at. And one game that I'm really looking at right now, and I just pulled it up, Guns, is North Carolina is laying 3 points at Appalachian State. And if you just go through historical line averages, this is incredibly short stuff for North Carolina. And this is where I would take Appalachian State at +3 at home in the middle of, I believe, Virginia, West Virginia. Oh, actually, North Carolina. No, they're in North Carolina, but they're in the mountains out west.
Yeah,
in North Carolina. And I think this is, obviously people don't think of this as, in terms of an intra-state rivalry. It's not. But the fact that they're in the same state also holds a little weight. I don't know if you have any comments on this one, Guns. If you don't, feel free to move it on to the next one.
I do actually.
Okay.
That you're right. That is a short line. They in North Carolina is going to be playing in Week 1, so they're playing Florida A&M, so they have one game under their belt.
Right.
Appalachian State, I haven't looked to see who's coming back on that team, but this is a run-first team. So if they have a good running back in there with an offensive line, that's going to really hurt UNC. And you have to know UNC doesn't have Sam Howell anymore. That has been a high production element into their offense. And you saw last year he kind of struggled because he didn't have the two-pronged running back situation that he had a couple years back when UNC was absolutely dominant. They have an old veteran coach that I don't really believe that he is a top-notch recruiter. I think there's going to be a situation where you should be able to see regression in the UNC team this year, especially with the level of competition this year in the ACC is going to be much, much better than it was last year with NC State. Clemson's going to improve. They had an off year because they were dealing with a lot of injuries on the defensive side. That's going to be a very competitive conference where I think UNC is going to be that team to fall to the wayside. And they're playing an Appalachian State team that is consistently one of the best teams in their conference. So, yes, I like them as a dog at home.
I mean, I agree. And as we're aligning and agreeing and drinking Thirsty Thursday, a beautiful one, it is. And, on that, truthfully, if you go back through North Carolina last year, for anybody who follows college football, follows North Carolina, follows the ACC, or follows sports betting, you remember how awful North Carolina was against the spread and how they could not defend anybody. And it was just an open season. As Guns alluded to, no Sam Howell, total transition here. The line is shortened up because of that. Of course, this guy's not an NFL starter right now, but he was their franchise for a period of time. Transition year, but again, the historical data does matter. When you see a Power 5 conference team laying a field goal or less to a team that's not in a Power 5 conference, take notes, be noteworthy of it, and really, it's for a reason. So, just a point on that, and Guns, segue us into another one, if you will.
So yeah, I was just looking at the game that was right underneath them is one that I want to study a little bit. NC State and ECU, both teams, NC State actually had to deal with a lot of injuries last year. They're going to be a very, very tough team this year in the ACC, but they're -10 on the road against an ECU team. Very tough place to play, very high octane offense and very emotional. They get up for games like this. I think this is one of those spots that maybe you want to take the dog. I need to look at it a little bit further on the situation. Who's coming back for that team? I mean, when you got to look from this perspective, it's only July 28th. This is where I'm just kind of studying, honing in on a couple of the major conferences, and I kind of trickle down to the smaller conferences as we go along. This is just phase 1 of studying. So when I look at games like this, I think of how they played last year, and then I'm like, okay, is a quarterback coming back? Is a wide receiver? How's the offensive line? The offensive line is huge. If you can have guys come back on the offensive line, that is going to set the tone for the offense, and that's going to get you points. But NC State, I know, is going to be one of those tough teams. I think Devin Leary is coming back this year. I know he's been off and on the injury perspective, but this was a tough team last year. You saw them beat a Clemson team that was predicted to be in the college football playoff on the road. So you know how good this team can be, and they're going to be just as tough this year. But this is a double-digit away favorite. So I have to look at that a little bit further to see who's coming back on the ECU side. I know this is a team that was on the up and up last year. I don't know if they're going to regress.
Yeah, and honestly, just as a general point, as again we segue into college football in the fall here as our exclusive capping point until NBA opens in late October. But when you start to really see these games, the line and the total have a correlation to each other.
Correct.
And when you see this game at -10 and the total's only 56, it's really tight. Like the whole environment, gambling within that game is really tight because they're basically telling you that they're going to win the game by 7 to 10 points under 56. So you really start to see where the lack of edge exists because, again, like we're looking at, I don't even know what is that. That's 33 to 23.
Yeah, something like that, right?
Yep. Right, 33 to 23. And that's your total and that's your line. And then you think about how it gets to 33 to 23, it's not touchdowns, right? So they're basically telling you these teams kind of suck. Like they're not going to execute their drives very well. You're going to get weird points because to get to 33 to 23, again, it's not just touchdown. It's, missed field goals. It's, missed extra points. It's safeties. It's whatever the hell. So basically in games like this, when you start to look at that correlation between the line and the total being so tight and the actual expectancy of the final result versus this, that's where you start to see it's really hard to gamble on. That won't be a game that I have any access point on. I do think if you go to San Diego State here, -6, laying versus Arizona at home, very interesting stuff. Obviously, Kevin Sumlin, is he still there or did he move on?
I'm sorry, you said San Diego State and
hosting Arizona. Is someone?
Someone's gone. Yeah,
he's gone. Okay,
yeah,
so it's a different environment.
Right.
Regardless, I think that game has access in some capacity. I think Arizona might get a jolt from that because he was so lackluster. And you talk about energy, and you talk about a group not rallying around a guy at all. That was Kevin Sumlin at Arizona. And you look at San Diego State last year. San Diego State is in a tough spot here from the standpoint that last year, most of the time, they were catching numbers. They were not favored by northward towards a touchdown.
Right.
That game, I do think, will have some accessibility, though. Guys, any comments on this?
So the pattern with San Diego State is they the total on this one's 49, which is kind of low for an Arizona style game. Is predicated on San Diego State. San Diego State is a defensive squad. They're one of the best in the country. I have to see who's coming back on that squad, but they're very consistent on the defensive side. Now, the one thing, and this is not a talking point for a lot of teams, but they lost their punter. And that punter was probably the best punter I've ever seen in college football. This guy could kick 80 to 90 yards. He could change field position. And it didn't matter how bad your offense played. He could be sitting at the 10. He says, no problem. I will hit it to the other 10. So that guy's gone. And now you're dealing with a situation where you lose that element of the game, which is a key element that not many people talk about on the special teams side that really helped San Diego get some success because their defense was so good and they controlled field position. I don't know who they have as their punter this year, and I don't really care because I don't think you're going to get a better punter than him. So San Diego State, I think it's, seeing them at -6 seems like the right line. I got to look at Arizona a little bit further. You're dealing with transfers. You're dealing with NIL. This is a team that's in a major conference. It's probably depleting in the Pac-12 with everybody leaving it. But it's one of those situations that, you may see San Diego as a first half squad. You could get it like -3, -4 in the first half or something like that. But really, I have no opinion at this point until I study the board a little bit further.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Obviously, look, some of these games, there's just a total lack of information here, but I do think another one that has some access potentially is Tulsa laying 1.5 at Wyoming. And we were discussing this before, but Wyoming is historically an absolute home juggernaut. If they're catching points, we can actually potentially go to a line spot here and look at Tulsa and say to ourselves, you know what? Tulsa, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, graduated a couple incredible secondary personnel to the NFL and wherever else. And then they had a lackluster year last year. I know you profited actually a couple Tulsa spots mid to late season where they were really lackluster and then they started to come later. But that being said, I think this team is on an upward movement point, having started the season so poorly last year. And you see them laying on the road at Wyoming, a historical juggernaut. Tulsa could be a good spot here, guys.
Yeah, it goes back to the motivation factor. And I think when I think of Tulsa, I think of the game where they went to the Shoe and they played an Ohio State team. Granted, it was an Ohio State team that was on a down year. But Tulsa was also on a down year, but their defense played highly motivated, and they actually had, I think they had the lead in the first half, and they made it very tough for Ohio State, but they ended up getting the victory. I think it was a plus 18 on Tulsa. Glad I hit that one. Tulsa, in the last 2 or 3 years, great program. I think they're on the up and up, like you said. I'd have to look at the situation on the offensive side. I think their defense is kind of been their driver as far as their progression is concerned. I need to see some improvement on the offensive side of the ball. I'll be looking at Tulsa a little bit thoroughly, as they are one of those teams that are always kind of undervalued in every spot that they're in. So, and you kind of pick your spots with Tulsa, especially when they're playing like a stronger team that may be kind of undervaluing them on the road. So yeah, Tulsa is one of those spots that when you look at Tulsa, you think of their defense, but what you want to know is how good is their offense going to be? Is that going to be an improvement, or are they going to kind of fall in line in the same situation and pattern that they have in the past?
Yeah, I agree, 100%. And again, we appreciate you guys listening here. Almost an hour strong, or 45 minutes shark at the gut, and we will be 20 minutes on Friday night. But last game, and then let's potentially wrap it up.
Yep.
I do want to talk about this Washington game hosting Kent State. And we mentioned it before in terms of the inconsistencies of the teams in the smaller conferences. It doesn't really get any smaller in college football Division 1A than the MAC. And Kent State certainly is that. And you look at Kent State on the road, plus 22 here against Washington. Washington opens their season. Kent State, Portland State, and then Michigan State, still out of conference. So they open with 3 out-of-conference games and 2 games against very lackluster opponents before opening their conference season for, I believe, 9 or 10 games, something like that. So you're opening up here, Washington laying a ton of points to a team like Kent State. And if you guys follow MAC football, you know one thing. This team will play offense. They will recruit in that Ohio-Pennsylvania corridor, and they will play offense. And if you catch, and again, this is week 1, so we're very data deficient. But if you catch just even a mild halfway effort from Washington, Kent State can absolutely get there on this number.
I just want to make a quick point before I get my Kent State opinion and the MAC in general out of conference. Notice that we're not picking on the main games. We're not talking about Ohio State and Notre Dame. We're not talking about any of the top-ranked games in week 1. Reason being is because those are the sharpest lines on the board. I mean, at least from initially starting the season, you don't want to really touch these games because there's so many unknowns, but it's also a high volume of tickets. It's what the public knows, especially with these teams. You just don't want to mess with that because this is where the books make their money. If you're playing outside of the box and you start looking at these other teams, you're going to really find some profitable elements as they go along the season. So it's very important to study the Fun Belt, the MAC, and all these non-P5 conferences and find who the biggest teams are. App State is an absolute juggernaut. You got to look at these teams as a whole. But so looking from the Kent State perspective, you're right. You're always going to get offense out of them. When you look at them from a non-conference perspective, from a MAC, Kent State is probably more suited to take as the first half, in my opinion, than to take them for the game. I think what happens is these teams get into the first week, they're a little bit more jumpy, they're jittery, and they're not 100% ready to handle a full schedule. So they're starting to get used to, playing, you know, uh, less at a practice level, and they're not ready to play at that higher game level. So it takes a little bit to get used to. And this is where these lower MAC conference teams take advantage. Where you can get burnt is, and I've gotten burnt on Kent State. I think they were playing Michigan last year, and they were plus 18. They actually played them very close in the first half, and then Michigan kind of like settled in and took over the game and played at a game level. And you saw Michigan go to the college football playoff last year. MAC teams out of conference, full game, I would say either avoid or fade, especially Central Michigan. They always play bad against non-conference teams in the first 4 weeks, and then they go and they dominate their conference. You always see them in the MAC conference championship a lot. Last year was kind of a bad year for them, especially back into the stretch. But that is, you want to see where the stronger teams are suited. Northern Illinois, another team that is plays worse out of conference, but when they play in conference, they're a tough team, and they're usually a dog against like a Central Michigan or something like that. But that's the stuff that I look for in these situations. It's better in week one when teams aren't ready, especially MAC teams that are a little bit hyped up, to take them in the first half as dogs than to take them in full game.
Yeah, and final point on that, I do think there's a slight difference. You mentioned Michigan last year. Michigan is obviously the big conference team within their conference environment. Washington is just such a ridiculous outlier for this matchup. I mean, This is like, if you're Washington, you are literally looking at these first two games as like minor league games. You get Kent State, and then you get Portland State, who's not even Division 1A. So you get two total utter bottom feeders, and then you get Michigan State, and then your conference schedule. I mean, again, this is so loose, but I do think this is just the ultimate letdown trap environment to start the schedule for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. But that's why I say that first half is going to be an absolute scare, and I think you're going to see Kent State maybe be up in the first half and Washington win the game. I don't know enough. Like, I only know about Washington from last year, and I wasn't impressed with them. Washington's always been that team year after year, kind of overvalued. And I don't understand why. And I think the books kind of catch up to them probably around week 6. And I don't know why that everybody's so high on Washington. Is maybe because they always get those big NFL caliber defensive tackles that they think the defense is going to be so good that no offense is going to score on them.
Yeah, and I also think that they just randomly come up with random blue chip prospects once every like 4 years. I mean, remember Drew Locker, and people get super high on him. I mean, you go back to the 90s, Napoleon Kaufman, running back, and all these guys. Like, it's one of those schools. It's up in the Pacific Northwest. There's not a lot going on up there in terms of professional sports. And it happens to be, it's that, and it's Seattle, which is, a decent college basketball school, but it's not
really. They did make a college football playoff. I'll give it to that. I think it was like 2014 or 20 around that area. They played Alabama and got smoked as 14.5 point dogs.
Yeah, and I don't mean to disrespect people up in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah. It's an incredible portion of the universe of the country, but it's just, they do have just enough to pull people in terms of thinking that they're big time when they haven't been big time. I mean, they haven't won a national championship in 30 plus years. I don't know if they've ever won a national championship, actually. So
I don't think they have, no.
Yeah, so I mean, they're not that big time ever. And they're getting these huge lines against out of conference opponents like Kent State. I think Kent State has some access, and there's just no way around it.
And historically, they've played well in week 1. So yeah, that's a good take for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, Guns, wrap it up and let's get out.
Man. Yeah, I am. I don't think I'm going to be able to sleep. I might be just studying college football all night long and just go to work with no sleep, just talking, mumbling about the Wisconsin Badgers first 4 weeks of the season. But I appreciate the Shark joining me as a co-host today. I love talking college football. I loved giving out a few F5 plays. Hopefully they hit for you. So that's going to do it for episode number 88. I appreciate everybody that has joined. And that was a little bit of a taste of what the Shark and the Gun can do. Probably a longer version. We're probably going to cut it to probably 20, 25 minutes. Very electric, very high energy. And we'll probably have some guests along the way. But thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Dadbodd podcast. Peace.